Okay. Yeah.
Milk. You want some cake?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
why not? He's healthy.
Yeah.
I'll give you
A handbook, ja.
Hij was vanochtend niet in school. En als hij niet in school is, dan is het denk ik niet hier. Dan waarom? Most he's coming in the morning in school. Dus okay, nice you be here. Always.
All right. Nice to be back, gentlemen. How's everyone? Good. How is everyone?
Still going strong, huh?
Still going strong, Baruch Hashem. Many more years, Bez Hashem.
Yeah.
Growth, learning, good things, simchas. Okay. All right, we'll follow on somewhere where we've left off.
Kashrut.
Shabbos. Yeah, we did that. We were doing about that. Yeah, we're doing squeeze it about Toichan, crushing.
Je let goed op.
But we're going to talk a bit about.
Listen, but some teachers,
Yeah.
I know everything what they said. No, not everything. And all the teachers, I'm thinking later on, what did they tell me? It's just difficult.
It's always, but it's not just the age. Sometimes you listen to something and it's interesting, it's entertaining. Then when you go out afterwards, you haven't actually tried to commit it to memory. It's very often the case. You listen to something and sometimes it happens.
It was a subject and it was interesting and it's just
Okay.
I'm being recorded, so I have to be careful what I say, but I was about to say, sometimes it happens when my wife is talking to me. I'm following the conversation, but then afterwards I can't remember what we spoke about. You have to commit things to memory. No, it's a problem though. I actually have this often, not just with that I can't say. I have this often, even when people ask me, especially when you go from one task to another task.
Yeah.
So you could be engaging, now we could be learning together, and then you could go off and do something completely different. And then once you move your mind over, you lose track of where you were before, and it comes back to hurt me sometimes because I work for different employments and do different things. And then in one of my roles, someone will call me and request something or ask for something. I say, yeah, I'll follow that up. But then immediately afterwards, I have to do something completely different. And then afterwards, it's, what did that person want from me? And not because we don't take it seriously. Anyway, okay, let's learn a little bit about the melacha of Meraked, of sifting. Now, I actually prepared a sheet.
Sifting.
Sifting. We're going to talk about Zeva. We're going to talk about it. I actually prepared a little sheet on the computer, sent it to print, and my printer didn't respond. He was blinking, there was a flashing light. Yeah, but it was 10 minutes ago, and whatever, it was 10 minutes ago. Anyway, all right, we'll have to continue. Yeah, just no, the machine says on, blinking, flashing light, responding, just
Do it by yourself.
no response. Anyway, so either way, some of what I'm going to say, some of that I'm going to say, I'm going to take them from here. We'll talk about Meraked. Now, we did previously talk about boire. Boire is sorting, separating, selecting, a mixture. We spoke quite a bit about boire. We had a mixture of apples and oranges, a mixture of different kinds of fish, a mixture of what have you not, and you want to separate them. And we said that to do boire, when it is a mixture, once something is considered, is categorized as a mitzvah, then in order to separate it on Shabbos, one needs to fulfill 3 conditions. Condition number 1 is that you take the good from the bad, aka also known as taking the wanted from the unwanted. Condition number 2 is that you take it manually by hand and not using any kind of utensil, any kind of any kind of instrument. Thank you. Condition number 3 is that it's done for immediate use and not for later, obviously not for another day, not for after Shabbos, absolutely, but immediate use, meaning the next meal, the following meal that you're going to eat, close to the next meal. That's what it means, immediate use. So that was boira. Now, it happens to be there's another malacha that's very similar to boira, and therefore the question is raised, what actually is the difference? And that malacha is meraked, which means to sift things, to sift. Now, sifting, in essence, is boira, is separating bikli with a utensil. Remember, we just said that one of the three conditions that need to be fulfilled, three need to be fulfilled, is that you do it by hand. And what happens if you do boira with a utensil? The answer is you're guilty, you're liable for boira, for the act, the melacha of separating min haTorah against the Torah law.
You may not use a sift.
You can't. Yes, but here's the point, my dear friend. The point is that already in boira, remember that the rabbis told us there are 39 distinct categories of melacha, 39 different categories of melacha, not 38. That means that each category operates independently. That means that if there's similarities between one category and another, it's problematic. There has to be an independent categorization of each melacha. Now, when we examine the melacha of boira, then we realize that one of the ways in which you are chayav, you're liable for boira, for a previous melacha, not the one we're going to focus on today, is in the case of boira bikli, of separating with a utensil. And one of the primary utensils of separation is a sieve. And so, or a knife would be a secondary, like a hand or whatever. But if I ask you which utensil can you do separating with, where the utensil itself performs the act of separation, what would you reply? A sieve. That's exactly what a sieve is. If you have wheat flour, wheat grain, and it's mixed up with a load of impurities of stones or dirt or sand. So what are you going to do? You're going to sieve it from the stones. Yeah. And if you sieve it, then you have transgressed the laws of Shabbos, of course, but specifically the melacha, the category of boira, of separating, because you've sorted with the use of a utensil, which means that you haven't fulfilled the three conditions. You may have the other two. You may be doing what you want from what you don't want. You may be doing it to use immediately, but you don't have the third condition. And therefore, what you've done is min haTorah, forbidden by Torah law. And that would be boira. And then if that's the case, then what is Meraked? What's special about the act Meraked means sifting? It's another new melacha. I'm making this clear. The Mishnah in Shabbos reads, obvious melachos are boim chosa achas. There are 40 minus 1, that's 39, primary categories of melacha. And the Mishnah starts, ha'choirish, v'hazoreya, v'hakoitze, v'ha'ma'ama, v'hadosh, v'hazoyer, v'haboira, v'hatoichen, v'hameraked. And so boira and meraked are two distinct melachas. And yet, it would seem that meraked, sifting with a sieve, is really something that we already mentioned in boira. Understand?
Double up.
It's kind of doubled up. Now, it can never double up because it's either one or the other. If it was the same thing, then we wouldn't have two different melachas. We just call it one. Again, 39 different categories of melachas means 39 possibilities of melacha. It doesn't mean 38, it means 39. So really, the Gemara already asked this question. The Gemara said that boira and meraked are seemingly very similar things.
Because you can distinguish the entities with boira, and you cannot distinguish the entities with sifting, because they are so mingled together that you can't.
So what you're saying is very good, and that's basic. So largely, that's part of the solution. The solution isn't clearly with regard to what the melacha actually does. In other words, the concept, the outcome, the purpose of the melacha is very similar to the melacha of boira, which is to separate off distinct categories, to separate off different things that you want and things that you don't want. However, the Gemara says the reason why it's given its own melacha, its own status, its own label as a forbidden activity is because in reality, both would take place in the selection and preparation of grain or other kinds of things. What does that mean, both would take place? We remind ourselves that originally the 39 melachas were understood, the 39 categories of law, which are min haTorah, are understood as being, the rabbis had a tradition that understood them as being 39 stages in the preparation necessary to build the Mishkan. Now, not every item in the Mishkan goes through 39 stages, of course, but there are 39 possible categories of creative activity which were necessary to build the Mishkan. Now, if you were making dyes, for example, dyes are the colorings that they use to color the textiles, then dyes were made from plants. In order to have plants, you need to plow, you need to plant, you need to cultivate, you need to water, you need to harvest, to gather. And lots of there should have been synthetics in those days, and then it would have been, and then Shabbos would have been much easier. Yeah.
Yes.
We could have cut out 11 or so of the malachas. Well, that wasn't the case. So now what happens is you have this kind of like from the seeds of a plant, and from the seeds, you're going to make a dye. Or in certain cases, seeds would produce a dye. First, the seed was mixed up with all other big impurities that have come from the ground, because when you gather everything together, it picks up lots of pieces of small pebbles, stones, also pieces of the stalk. For example, the stalk of the plant. You have the plant, and there's a seed. There's also the stalk that got disconnected. The stem.
Still.
Yeah.
Still.
Right, and that's also mixed up because in the action of threshing of dorsa, which came earlier, you separated off the seeds, but there's still a big mixture. And so there's all kinds of mixture. So in boira, you separate, you could say, some of the unwanted material, which is bigger, from the material that you want. Now, the next malacha in the process, actually, if you follow the list in the Mishnah in Shabbos, is toichan. Toichan is grinding. So once you have the seed, you then crush it. Now think about wheat, for example, grain. In the case of grain, it's much easier to visualize. You have all the different things that grew with the grain, and you have the stalk, the stem, what do you say it's called? The stale, and you have the shell, the outer shell of the wheat, and you extract by the process of power with dorsa, you extract, we spoke about this in the past, you extract the kernel of wheat, the seed of wheat from its shell, but then it's still mixed up, it's extracted, it's no longer connected, but it could be mixed in a big mixture. So then you do boira. Boira separates off the mixture. So now you've just got the grain, okay? The next stage is toichan. Toichan means to crush. What happens is you take the grain and you crush it. But even when you crush it, sometimes there's lumpier pieces, sometimes there's smaller bits of dirt that get mixed in, sand or dirt or other impurities, and they're much finer and they're much smaller. And so then after that, it goes through the process of meraked, of sifting, to make it into pure flour. So in essence, the concept of meraked is very similar to the concept of boira. But the stage of meraked is a further stage that refines something so that it can be properly used. And it's done normally after toichan. It would be done in that process. It would be done after crushing. It doesn't need to be done after crushing. Every malacha operates independently. And the point is that you've done something new that wasn't already incorporated in the previous malacha of boira. So although the concept is similar, although the process is similar, the concept is similar, but it's a later development in something. Now, as far as we're concerned, our question that we need to address is, for us who aren't necessarily following a process of going from planting all the way through to getting the wheat ready to make bread, we're not going to do both. In other words, our boira, the discussions we had together about boira could be entirely removed from separating sand from pieces. Grain from pieces of sand. And so to our meraked, our sifting could potentially be different from separating grain from sand. And therefore, for us, the real question is, we can now understand conceptually how in the Mishkan, it formed a later stage to the process, and it was an additional process to something that had previously done in Boira. It wasn't mutually exclusive. It wasn't that it was either one or the other. There exists a possibility to do Boira and later on Meraked, which allows the possibility for two independent melachas to operate, that we can talk about the fact that two of the 39 melachas are similar but not exactly the same. One is Boira, is separating, and one is Meraked, sifting. But for us, what actually is Meraked that makes it not sifting? In other words, if I were to do boira with utensil, when is it boira and when is it Meraked? Because for us, we're not actually following that process in our everyday lives. We want to know what activity in our kitchen is Meraked and what activity is boira.
So if I connect to the Mishkan, you need sand for concrete or for whatever you need.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. But then you have to have the pure sand, and then it is sifting.
So if you were to sift, you're absolutely right. If you were to go to a sand pit with your children and sift through sand, then you'd be doing Meraked. You'd be sifting.
Exactly. Also for the Mishkan.
Absolutely. And but the thing, the more, if we say the more precise, without the examples, the more academic question, I was trying to understand the concept of a malacha, the building blocks of a malacha. What is a malacha? What's the description? What's the definition of a malacha? Then we know that boira is possible in the case that it's not Meraked. What does it? I'm becoming far too detailed and academic. I'll explain what I mean. I'm going to explain what I mean. Listen.
They can follow you.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. There are many possibilities of doing boira that are nothing to do with sifting. That's clear. Boira doesn't include, but isn't exclusive to sifting. For example, we spoke about boira in the fruit bowl with the fruits, and we had no sieve involved in the fruit bowl and sorting the fruits, or sorting the knives and forks in your cutlery drawer are not sifting. There's no sieve involved in sorting the knives and forks, and yet to sort the knives and forks, if you did it by hand, but you took the thing you don't want from the thing you do want, which is of course one of the problems, you haven't fulfilled 1 to 3 conditions, is boira. In other words, boira is far greater than exclusively sifting. The possibility of being of being liable for boira is huge. We spoke about so many different, boira is a very common malacha that can take place in our houses. We spoke about boira in the case where you've got a bowl on the table of fish, of white fish, and you're trying to remove the bones from the fish. And if you take the bone off the fish and not the fish from the bone, we mentioned that according to some authorities, that's already called boira. You are liable, you've transgressed separating. Now, that has nothing to do with a sieve. So we understand, so we understand that boira is far broader than sifting. Boira is far more all-encompassing than sifting. So that's not the challenge. The academic question is, but whenever you sift, you're just doing one form of boira. And as the focus today is what's happened to me. The focus today is on the sifting. In other words, when we look at the malacha of Meraked and we say we have a new malacha, today we've discovered a new world. It's called Meraked. In this world of Meraked, there's another malacha that we didn't previously speak about called sifting. Well, wait a minute. What is sifting? Sifting is separating. Oh, okay. So Rabbi Stanton mentioned that in the Mishkan they did too, but every time I take a sieve and sift, presumably I could be just doing boira with a sieve. And therefore, where does actually Meraked function independently as far as the malacha is concerned? Leaving aside as far as the process in the Mishkan is concerned, which is all very nice if you're going to do both. It's all very nice if you have something that first needs separating from the bigger impurities, like you mentioned, and then it needs separating from the smaller impurities which came in when you did the crushing. Very nice. So we've discovered that there's a possibility to do Meraked and boira, that first you did boira with a sieve, and then you did Meraked with a sieve. But for us, practically speaking, what is Meraked that isn't boira? You hear the question? Mm-hmm. It's very academic. Mm-hmm. And the answer is basically that boira concerns itself with removing good from bad or wanted from unwanted. And the focus of boira, so to speak, is specifically on one and not the other. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's one and not the other. I want the oranges and not the apples. So there's a mixture. I'm happy to leave one in its place. I want one and not the other. The focus of Meraked is, although I want one and not the other, but I'm focused on both in order to extract the one. What does that mean? What does it mean? I'm saying very nice words. What do these words mean? Be clear. The answer is sifting. The reason why it's called Meraked, the word Meraked means lirkod. As a lirkod, to dance. Why is Meraked called dancing? Because you take a sieve and you make the items dance on the sieve.
Yes.
So what you actually do is you operate at the same time on both the good morning, on both the good and the bad. You're focused on both. Good morning. You're focused on both the good and the bad.
Even
Ja.
netjes goedemorgen terug zeggen.
Goedemorgen.
No, he didn't hear. Good morning. How are you?
I'm just still living.
Baruch Hashem.
Nou,
Baruch Hashem.
nou, fijn.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. So in Meraked, in the case of sifting, in the case of Meraked, which is sifting, you still, yeah, Baruch Hashem. We're sifting and he's still living. We're all trying to do similar things. So in the case of Meraked, you make both the good and the bad move. You're focused on both the good and the bad at the same time, in order that one will come from the other. But you're not specifically focused on one over the other. In the case of separating, of boira, what you're actually intrinsically doing is you're taking one and leaving the other. And the question is, did you take the good from the bad or the bad from the good? If you took the bad from the good, you're separating, or you're liable for separating. And if you take the good from the bad, you're involved in a process of preparing food, which the rabbis didn't consider separating. In the case of Meraked, it's not about which one's going to fall through the sieve. It could be both ways round. It could be that the wanted item falls through the sieve, or it could be that the wanted item stays at the top. For example, I'll give you an example of that. In some cases, the wanted item stays at the top. For example, if you were to separate fine flour from coarse flour with a sieve, then the fine flour goes through. So in that case, the thing you want goes through the sieve. If you were to separate, let's say, flakes of nuts, flaky walnuts or whatever, from dirt, then the dirt might be smaller than the flakes of nuts, in which case the dirt goes through the sieve. It doesn't really make a difference in Meraked. In boira, it would make a difference. In boira, the question would be, what are you holding back and what's moving away? Because what's moving away, according to most authorities, there's a discussion about what's moving away, what you're taking off is the focus. And if, therefore, the thing you're taking off is the wanted, is good, then it's fine. And if what you're taking off is the unwanted, it's not good, it's not fine. But in the case of Meraked, it's irrelevant, because Meraked is to make both items dance, both together, and the result is that one comes from the other, and it doesn't make any difference anymore if the good comes off the bad or the bad comes off the good. You're liable for the act of sifting. So there is a very fine line between Meraked, the melacha of sifting, and boira with a sieve. Boira with a sieve is also chayev, but for us, for all intent and purpose, generally speaking, using a sieve in a sieve-like manner, that means to make the particle jump, to use a sieve in a sieve-like manner would be called Meraked. In other words, to use the sieve and make things move, to shake it around so that things go through. Now, maybe a very fundamental question is...
For immediate, to eat it for the meal.
That doesn't have to.
Even if you use it immediately,
Yes.
you're still liable. Absolutely, because very good, very, very good point.
If in the first case with the flour, you separate the flour from the whole. In the case of the nuts, you separate the dirt, and you don't want the dirt.
Exactly. In other words,
The flour, it's okay.
exactly. In other words, and that's precisely the point. One second, that's precisely the point. If we were talking about the melacha of boira, then that distinction that you just made would be a fundamental difference. Because in boira, you are allowed to take the good from the bad and not the bad from the good. And so with boira, with a utensil, the question would be, are you taking the good from the bad or the bad from the good? And that would be there is a discussion, which one is going from, they're both moving away in the end. One's staying here, one's staying there. Generally speaking, the authorities understand that the thing that moves away, through the sieve, that would be the thing that you're taking, and the thing that stays behind is not the thing you're taking, but there's a discussion about that. But whichever way we look at it, one or the other, it's one or the other. In boira, I'm going to try and make it very clear, in boira, you are liable if you take the bad from the good and not the good from the bad. So depending on what's called taking away, which direction of motion is called taking away will make all the difference. So there would be a difference between when the good goes through the sieve or when the bad goes through the sieve, in theory. Additionally, 1 second, otherwise everyone remember your questions, but it's important to, otherwise additionally, as our dear friend here said, Miniasha, additionally, in Boira, we have other exemptions. For example, we spoke about separating for immediate use. In Meraked, all of that goes away. Because Meraked operates independently as a new kind of melacha, Meraked is where one takes a sieve and jumps the particles on the sieve, dances the particles on the sieve in order to effect a separation through the sieve. So you could compare it to something in Boira, but the rules, or rather the conditions, are totally different. There are no conditions anymore. It doesn't matter if it's good from bad or bad from good. It doesn't matter if the good comes through the sieve or the bad comes through the sieve. It doesn't matter if you do it for immediate use or not for immediate use. The fact that you've got this sieve and you're making it jump up and down on the sieve is the very essence of the melacha of Meraked. And so good from bad, bad from good doesn't come into the discussion. The action of Meraked is to make items dance on a sieve where the focus of the activity is going to be very much geared on both items together, the good and the bad, the wanted and unwanted. You make them both jump, but the result that will come off that is that something moves away from something else through the use of the sieve. Whereas in Boira, you don't focus on both. There's a mixture, but your activity is addressed at one entity of the mixture. So in the case of oranges and apples, you separate the apples from the oranges, or the oranges from the apples. Depending on which one you want, if you want the apples and not the oranges, you would have to take the apples away from the oranges. And if you want the oranges and not the apples, you'd have to take the oranges and not the apples. But either way, you don't touch, or you might touch it. I mean, I don't mean literally don't touch, but you're not involved with the other one. You remove one. If you have a combination, a big bundle of knives, forks, and spoons, and you want your knives now, then the correct way to do Boira would be to take the knives. Are you taking the forks? No. Of course, inevitably, you touch the forks. You move them if you don't need it. You take the knives. And if you want the knives, but you take the forks instead, in other words, your focus is on the wrong one, then you're doing Boira because you've taken the bad from the good. Whereas in Meraked, your activity is the efforts of your activity are focused on both together. And by making them both jump, you allow them to separate. That's the crucial difference. Yes.
No, you involve an active physical
Process.
process.
Absolutely.
So if I make a cheesecake, let's say, and I use yogurt, and there the water goes away, and it is not a sifting. Well, it is a sifting process.
Maar je doet
with
wel
a
door
blanket,
Shabbos.
for example, whatever you use, and you did it, and it takes some hours. So you go into Shabbos, and it's still going. You are the originator of that process,
Right.
and the blanket is doing the process. What's to consider this? Is it Meraked? Because I don't dance with it. Something other one is dance with it.
Now, the very next thing I was going to discuss, straining, what we call straining in English. But leave aside your question of doing it.
You do it on Friday, you need it on Sunday.
Yeah. But what about straining on Shabbos?
That it's Shabbos. Yeah. Okay.
Straining.
Don't do it.
And you don't use your hands.
No.
Using your hands was like Meraked, like dancing.
Straining. You know what straining is?
No.
Straining is filtering. You could use a cloth. You could use something. You get something that's full of liquid and solid. You put it on the thing, and the liquid drains from the solid.
Je bent een zeef, maar dat is filteren.
Filteren, ja.
Iets anders.
Die doe je een handdoek in. En,
Oh, yeah.
Lekker koffiefilter, cheesecake.
First, you separate the liquid from the. Ja, het vloeibare. Je maakt het wat dikker. De stof die achterblijft.
nou, ik geloof het van niet.
Nee.
Okay, very academic. This is going to get very. You ready?
It is academic.
It's academic. This is very academic. You ready? You ready, everyone? Early in the morning for this.
Okay.
Have to have a coffee. His intent. This is where I love. This is why I love Hilchos Shabbos. By the way, the reason why I love Hilchos Shabbos is because it demonstrates that halacha is not random. It's often when people encounter halacha, they assume it's just accept it as it is. It is what it is. Yeah, the rabbi said, and even Orthodox Jews, religious Jews will tell you, listen, the rabbi said it, I'll do it. It doesn't make any sense, but I'll do it anyway. In truth, halacha is not like that. Halacha is a legal academic system that makes perfect sense. However, you have to know the rules. There's axioms. In other words, the starting point of the laws of Shabbos, of course, are that Hashem said you can't work on Shabbos. The rabbis had a tradition that there's 39 categories of laws. And then we're working with those conditions. The starting place of the fact that you can't eat meat and milk is, of course, God-given and doesn't logically, I wouldn't say doesn't make sense is the wrong word to say, but it was not something we would have originated ourselves, that meat and milk can't be eaten together. But once we have the axiom, we have the foundational premise, which is this is forbidden, this is permitted, then the rabbis throughout the generations, all the way from the Talmud and down, even before the Talmud, have been debating with logical debates. The Gemara is a logical process. The Gemara will ask, it'll say, if we say A, how can B apply? And what about C? And the Gemara will use logic, premises of logic. It's not a structure of supernatural mysticism where somebody says this is forbidden and someone else says, I had a dream last night and it wasn't forbidden. That's not how it works. And Shabbos is...
What you say is actually Naaseh. You get it? And Nishma
is to understand, comprehend. Very nice, beautiful, beautiful. But Hilchos Shabbos is very much like that. The laws of Shabbos have that. If the Mishnah said that there's Boira and there's Meraked, the Mishnah told us there's two different malachas, then there are legal definitions to each one. There must be, because otherwise it'd just be the same thing and it'd be semantics. And if there's legal definitions, then we can start to question those definitions and say, well, what about this? Is this A or is it B? And what about this is straining. And listen to this. I just told you very nicely, hopefully very nice, I told you that when you make the items dance, that's called sifting, Meraked, and not Boira. That's where Meraked is independent to Boira. Boira could be many more things. This is Meraked. Straining, what happens when you strain something? When you strain something, let's talk about straining wine. This we don't do so often. Water, wine, whatever it is. You have wine that you've made in the barrel, and the sediments, you know the sediments, the impurities, yeah, they fall to the bottom, they're a bit mixed in.
Bezinksel.
Yeah.
Precies. And then you want to get the wine to be pure, clear wine without bits.
You don't want
You don't want the bits.
Yes.
So what do? So you take, it could be some kind of cloth.
Mhm.
It could, in theory, be a sieve-like thing, of a very fine mesh, like a fine sieve with much smaller, like a synthetic sieve that has much smaller holes.
Mm.
And you pour everything on, and obviously immediately water rushes through, but then you leave it for a significant amount of time, however long it takes, and eventually all the water drains out and the solid mass is at the top. Is that called Meraked? Is it sifting? Is it Boira? Is it separating?
Not liquid.
According to what I just told you before,
What is it?
I have a question completely different. For Pesach,
Doe dus niet zelf niet.
olive oil is only allowed if it's unfiltered. And why is that?
is that the case?
Yes, because filtered olive oil you can use for frying and only for also for worm purposes, because there's sediments which burn, which are causing cancer. So you want filtered olive oil, because there's always a bit of sediment in the olive oil when you press it.
And they say on Pesach you can't use the filtered one? Only filtered?
Only unfiltered.
Only unfiltered. I don't know. I don't work in kashrus. It could be, I don't know for sure. It could be that when they filter things like oil or apple, it could be being recorded, and then they're going to, afterwards, someone's going to say he thinks he knows what he's talking about and he doesn't have a clue. I don't work in kashrus. It might be that you'd have to ask Rav. I know with apple juice, for example, the way they take the sediments out of the apple juice is actually they use some kind of, it's probably a scientific word, but something sticky that they run through the big vat of apple juice, and the sediments stick to the thing. So they sometimes use animal derivatives, for example, like things from
Proteins, yes. Proteins.
proteins, yeah, or
Protein.
pig fats and things like that, fats from pork. They use things like that. And obviously by the time it's filtered out, you don't taste any of it. And as far as the health, the food FDA or whatever they're called is concerned, it's not a problem at all. And it's not even called, it's not got meat in it, it's not whatever. But for kashrus concerns, it could be a problem. It could be that the proteins that they use in olive oil could be or chametz-based problematic proteins, maybe to filter it. I don't know. Either way,
Bewaard over 4 dagen eraf op.
It's not totally filtered.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that, so straining, let's get back to straining. So if you go with the distinction that we said before, that meraked is to make it jump up and down, then straining will not be meraked because you don't make it jump up and down. Straining will be boira. It's forbidden, but it'll be boira. Because you're using a utensil to separate, that's boira. That is boira, right? We said when we learned boira that one of the conditions of boira that make it forbidden is if you use a utensil to separate, you've done boira.
You have to do by hand, you said.
No, to make it permitted.
Yeah. Okay.
In other words, if you did it with a utensil, it would be boira.
Yeah.
So instead of it being meraked, it's boira. But the activity is forbidden. You cannot strain on Shabbos. But under which category of melacha does it fall? Boira. That's how one opinion looks at it. They say, based on our distinction that meraked means to make something jump, you didn't make anything jump. Therefore, you're not liable for meraked, for sifting. You're liable for what we call boira. Another way of looking at it, though, is to say that perhaps the key of meraked, and I mentioned this in passing before, but the key of meraked is not specifically to make it jump, but that the focus at the moment that you try to begin the separation process is on both items, the good and the bad, the wanted and the unwanted. Remember the case of the knives and forks? With the knives and forks, there's a mixture, but I have no interest in one side of the mixture. I want the other. So the focus, what's being removed is A from B. And then it depends. If A is wanted, great. If A is not wanted, then not great. But you're focusing on one half of the mixture. Whereas meraked, we could explain, is when you focus at the same time on both together and then they get separated. And in how does that play out in the case of straining? Because you take your big bottle of wine, your big vat, your barrel of wine. I'm not going to actually pour it on the table, don't worry. Hopefully not. You take a big vat of wine and you pour everything at once onto the sieve. Oh, little drop came out. Yeah, you have to be careful there. You pour everything together onto the sieve, correct, Toch? Yes. And now, while you've acted upon both the wine and the sediments, you've put them all together into a location where they will naturally start to drain. At that particular moment in time, you have now done meraked. You've placed the two items together. In other words, the focus of your activity is on two items, not on one, is on both the good and the bad, the wanted and the unwanted, and not on one. And so you could say that it's still meraked, that the definition of meraked is not exclusive to when you actually make it dance. Making it dance is the example, but the example of making it dance demonstrates that the true focus of meraked, the true distinction between meraked and boira, is that in the case of meraked, your activity is focused on both the good and the bad together. Whereas in the case of boira, your activity is focused, the focus of your energy and your activity is one element out of the mixture. Understand the difference? And so there is a discussion, and it doesn't make any practical difference to us, because either you're liable for boira or you're liable for meraked. It's one or the other, as we said. If it's not meraked, it's boira. But academically speaking, there's a very important discussion in the laws of meraked to define what meraked is. And the outcome, the nafkamina we call it in Gemara, the practical outcome would be, is straining meraked or is straining boira. If the action of meraked is to make something dance, then in straining you don't make it dance, and therefore straining goes back into the category of boira. If the action of meraked is to make something, not to make something dance, but specifically to be focused on both good and bad, wanted and unwanted simultaneously, then straining is also going to be included in Meraked.
Is it only
Does that, well,
only
did I say anything? Okay, all right, it's academic, all right. We could have learned the parasha of the week.
only concerning food? Is it only concerning food, or is it all action?
No, sand, for example. Sand is a
no
food.
food.
Edible or non-edible, doesn't make a
But I
difference.
give it an example. There's a Sefer Torah which is not good, and
Komt de
no,
sier
no,
over
no.
hier.
You open the Sefer Torah and you say, well, it's not a. Now the whole Sefer Torah is one concept. Where
Yeah.
do I go to? So you sift in a way you make a conceptual borei because you want to have the good, but that you also do this Meraked. So what are you doing actually?
No, so
Wait, is it? I mean, I go very far with this, but is this also something that you call Campbell?
no, so if something that doesn't use a sieve or a strainer isn't at all Meraked. The Meraked is not Meraked. And boira, something has to be two distinct items that can be separated. If it's considered one, considered one, it's not called physically, yeah. But both could apply with non-edible items, that's for sure. I keep giving the example of knives and forks. Knives and forks are not edible items, but they're useful items, and therefore boira applies. Boira applies with books, boira applies with clothes, boira applies with any mixture of different items altogether that you want one, not the other. Meraked also is equally true with non-edible items like sand. If you were to go to the sand pit, or you go with your kids and they take on these in the sand pits in Bouteveld, sometimes the people happily leave their things, the kids can play with it. A sieve in the sand, if everything's, we'll talk about that in a minute, but if everything just goes through, then you're not doing anything. Sometimes kids just like to sieve and it doesn't really do much. But if you're taking parts from other things, and others, the rocks, the stones or whatever, then you're sifting. That is Meraked, that is sifting.
If I go into a shoe and the shoe has the opening door, somebody says, okay, come in. You're a woman, you go right. And the man goes left, then you're making a choice.
Okay, so
We don't eat them women.
The people who came there didn't know.
Right.
So they get somebody who
right. No, so
no, it's just a question.
no, but okay, but it's the question at the end. The question might be, it might be an unusual way of looking at it, but the question, what's the answer? What actually is the answer? And why is it not called boira?
Yeah, exactly.
The answer is it's not called boira for two reasons. First of all, in order for something to be called boira, in order to even begin the question of whether you're allowed how to separate something, it has to first be a mixture. Distinct items are not called a mixture. And I said this at the time several months ago. If you look at the items on this tray, he doesn't. Whatever. If anyone's watching, you'll understand. There's a load of items on a tray. There's some cups. There's a little bowl of sugar cubes. There's a little bowl with sweeteners in it, and there's a teapot on a tray. Is this a mixture or not a mixture? Is this a mixture? The items on the tray.
This is a mix.
So what do you think? Is it a mixture?
No.
No. The halacha says it's not a mixture. The halacha says that distinct items that are not lying entangled in one another, on top of one another, and each one is purely distinct. You don't say, I'm separating this cup from the mixture. You just say, I'm taking a cup. It's not something that's distinct. With human beings, even if you had 100 people congregating outside shul, and you'd say there's a mixture of men and women, and halacha refers to men and women mingling together as ta'aruvois, which means a mixture. If you'd say there's a mixture of men and women, nonetheless, because they don't require an act of sorting, because each person has free volition and will and movement, so therefore you're not actually separating anything, because they always are we are all separate. As much as we go close together and gather and chat, we are separate, and we have the ability to go back to our state of being separate. It doesn't require an act of sorting. So even with human beings who can move, or with animals, for example, they can never be a mixture as far as halacha is concerned, because so long as they can continue to move and operate for themselves, then the state that they're currently in now of being mixed is irrelevant, because they could just as easily be in an unmixed state 3 seconds later. So that humans can never be a mixture as far as halacha boira is concerned. Yeah, or animals, things with free. No, anything that can move for itself can't be a mixture.
Bees and wasp together. If you're the
anything that has a free state, and in its free state can move, then it's a transient mixture. It just currently looks mixed, but they're not actually mixed. I'm trying to think of a good example. You can't call it mixed if they can just as easily be unmixed. Currently, they look mixed, they appear mixed, but they're not actually mixed. A mixture is something, the concept of boira, maybe I should say it better. The reason why boira is a malacha, all malachas have to be creative. They have to be something that transformative. In other words, it's currently mixed, and if not for human creative intervention, they will remain mixed. So what you're doing is you're improving the pile. You have a pile of all different kinds of fruits, and you separate one from the other, and now you've enhanced the whole pile because you've made it better. You've taken one from the other. That's the concept of a malacha. But in this case that a malacha is, they're all free range and moving around. They don't need your transformative act. And if you did an act, it wouldn't be considered creative because they're just as easily loose. They move around the whole time.
Create or you break down.
Different, breaking down, but not creating. It's not transformative. To transform something, it needs to be in a bad state, in a state that's not conducive, and you then operate on the state and make it conducive. That's meleches machsheves. To lay the table on Shabbos is a wonderful activity. It's not one of the 39 categories of malacha. It's very nice, it's beautiful, makes everything look nice, makes everyone happy, but it's not transformative. What you're doing is you're just taking a plate from the cupboard and putting it on the table. That's not in halacha considered transformative. The 39 categories of malacha are creative, transformative activities. They're not activities where you just move things from one place to another. Someone else was going to ask something.
No,
think.
I have one question. There are more questions, but
I have many as well.
a small piece of lemon,
Yeah.
and you have tea in the cup,
Yeah.
and you want to press the lemon in the tea.
Right.
The small press, de kleine van die hele kleine dingetjes. Is that allowed?
You want to squeeze the lemon into the tea?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big discussion about that. That would, you know which malacha you're referring to? The malacha of dosh.
Yes.
Of dosh is called, we said, dorsa. Dorsa.
Perhaps voor middelijk gebruik.
Very good. Well remembered.
Ik heb de rabbijn zien doen. Is it allowed?
With lemons, yes. With grapes and olives, not. Lemons can be squeezed into liquid. You can't squeeze a lemon on its own. You can squeeze it into your tea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do it directly your tea, maar not your.
Ja.
Kan do it on
Je
the.
perst, hè?
Ja, maar niet om de, hoe heet dat, persen.
Ja, pers in de thee. En
Yes,
dat een
You can squeeze it onto fruit, onto fish as well and all of that.
Ja, ja.
You can squeeze them. You can't squeeze it
maar
alone.
niet op de machine.
Ja.
Dat,
nee.
hoe dat heet.
So let me ask you another question now, gentlemen. Can we use, exciting this, at least for me is, can one use a salt shaker on Shabbos? Salt shaker. A salt shaker. Because what you're doing is, you're making it dance, and it's going through a strainer, through a sieve, through holes. Wonderful, wonderful. That's the precise answer.
The sea salt, all the salt is from the sea. That's not the question. But if you have to
crush, you can't crush. That we spoke about last time. You can't crush. No crushing. No crushing that. But you have a regular, on the table, you have a salt and the pepper shakers. So you got this, you shake the salt, despite the fact that you're putting things through a sieve, but you're not sieving them, you're just putting it through a sieve. Why do you put it through, why do we do it? Why did they invent this salt shaker? The answer is very simple, because if you pour salt, lots of it come on the food, and you don't want lots. What do you want? You want the small holes to sprinkle a fine amount of salt. So it's in proportion, it's moderate. You don't want to oversalt your food. So you shake a little bit of salt onto the food. But you're not actually the shaker, the holes in the salt cellar, we call it in English a salt cellar, don't know why. The holes in the salt shaker are not designed for separating. They're just designed for kind of like distributing. So you could think as well of the powder sugar. Yeah, but you have also powder sugar. Yeah, and you could even you want to do on the sufganiyot, yeah? So you take like a sieve, like little sieve, you have these small sieves, and you pour it in and you shake it like that.
But you're not separate.
Exactly, and therefore you could even do that. So you're using a sieve. You're sifting, you're absolutely sifting. You're moving.
You don't know if there are lumps in it.
Right, so if it absolutely, no, you're saying very good. Rabbi Falk said the same thing. Loose confectionery sugar, Falk says, may be put into a sieve and shaken slowly over a cake. Since the sugar is totally unmixed, it's loose and granulated, it cannot be compared to putting things in a sieve. However, if the sugar would have pieces, harder pieces, then you can't, because that would be comparable to sieving. So salt and confectionery sugar, if it's loose and fine, and all you're doing is distributing it around, it's fine. Coming back to the sand in the sand pit, it's the same thing. If the children are playing with the sieve simply because they want to sprinkle the sand around like confectionery sugar, then they're not actually sieving. However, in the case of sand, one would have to be more careful because sand in the playground, in the sand pit, inevitably does have other pieces and stones and dirt, and therefore you would always come into problems of sifting. I'll give you an example where the salt cellar might not be so straightforward. Some people put rice grains
In the salt.
in the salt to keep it from clumping, to keep the moisture away, to suck up the moisture. Can you now shake your salt over the food, knowing that the pieces of rice are too big to come through the holes?
Yes, because
Yeah, but
separating the salt from the what and not the other way.
But Meraked, my dear friend, doesn't make a difference which way. In Meraked, we said, in Boira, we said it makes a difference. We made this very clear distinction. In Meraked, it doesn't matter which way. In Meraked, the fact that you're shaking something to release it through the holes is already Meraked. Just the shaking act in the sieve, shaking with a sieve is Meraked. You're dancing it through the sieve. So what do we think?
so you are separating the good from the bad.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because if we were talking about boira, then good from bad and bad from good makes difference. But when we moved over to the melacha, the distinct category of melacha called meraked, it doesn't really matter anymore. So long as you're doing the action with a sieve, we said, and you're moving around everything on top so that pieces fall through, it doesn't make a difference anymore. If good comes out, bad comes out, you're doing meraked. So are you doing meraked? 1 second. Ms. Hegelich.
We had a painting pot that put buttons in, and after they put the color in, so the buttons should get the color. Then they put it after, take it off in a safe.
In a sieve.
In the safe there was wood or something that the color took.
And then the rest drained out.
Yeah.
That would be sieving. That would be sieving. Yeah. That would be draining. We said straining. You're using the sieve to strain the liquid away from the wood, the excess liquid. That would be straining. But what do we think about the salt? You're going to say, yeah, Bas, you're going to say.
This one, I think it's not that, because the rice takes away water.
Right.
So the rice is active. We are not active. The rice is active. We are doing nothing. So the rice is different.
Nahon, when you put the rice in. But now that the rice is in, so the rice had a
The
function.
rice is sifting.
So okay, maybe that might be, but no, as you
They're both safe.
leaving aside the rice,
Okay.
it isn't. But even if you wanted to make it, you put it on a Thursday. Exactly, it's there for weeks. But the point is, at this moment in time, you've got a mixture. The mixture is salt and rice, and the nice small holes at the bottom of the salt shaker are very useful for you because through these holes you ensure that the salt comes out and not the rice. So now you're actually separating the salt and the rice. So there are two different opinions in that. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. There doesn't need to be fluids. Both separating grains from sand is also sifting.
Leave something when the one of the
Conditions.
no of de grondstoffen. Hoe zeg je dat in het Engels?
Grondstoffen, ja, raw materials.
Yeah, raw materials.
One takes something from the other.
No, not in Meraked, not in this malacha. In sifting, no, in sifting it doesn't make a difference. The answer is that there's a machlokas. That's the answer. Some poskim say, some authorities say that it's not considered separating because in the end, your intention is not to separate salt from rice. The rice was there for a completely different purpose. The separation is just salt. You're just sprinkling salt from salt. And the fact that there's bits of rice inside makes no difference because you're not actually trying actively to not get the salt out the rice. You put the salt there, you want the salt to remain behind. You don't look at it as a utensil that's trying to separate salt from rice. It was always a salt shaker. It was always there to separate salt from salt. And in the meantime, there just happens to be some rice that are higher up or somewhere inside. That's how one authority looks at it. And other authorities say that at the end of the day, it is separating because the shaker, you want the salt and not the whatever. So there's machlokas about it, but it's a machlokas depends on how we look at it. What's the nature of the malacha?
How about a jar of water which has a strainer so the ice cubes will not go through?
Right. We're going to talk about strainers maybe next time.
And flavoring is flavoring instead of separating. We're together. So you have a creative action of making something new.
When?
You put it in there and it goes by itself.
If you put salt in your food.
You have two things.
If you put salt in your food.
For example.
Yeah.
And you put it in and you want to have it become salty. The one entity is not the same. The second entity is not the same, but together it gives something new. Are you allowed to create something on Shabbos?
Yes, absolutely. The only things that are called the only things that are called creating are the 39 categories of malacha that are creating. And the bigger question would be, why is this not creating?
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, and in terms of food, as far as food is concerned, the halacha looks at food and says that when you eat, you do lots of things and put them together. And it's not called creating, it's called eating, enhancing your food. It has to have a creative purpose. With cooking, the reason why cooking is because cooking is a significant change that comes through heat. And that's when we consider it transformative. But if it's not using heat, then it's not called transformative, it's just called eating. And halacha distinctly separates between putting different foods together, eating your cake with your coffee, and putting salt is all the same thing as far as halacha is concerned. It's not transformative, it's just a way in which you eat. But cooking is transformative. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk about maybe making ice of different things. Some say yes, some say not.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Stolling, dat is dus, laten we zeggen, je bloed en...
What's stalling?
Dat is...
Let's say you have blood and it has to become concrete.
Concrete.
Thickening the blood. Yeah, what with medication?
Yeah.
If you have blooding, you have
Bleeding.
Blood thinner bleeding. Right. With medicine, yeah, but you have to look after your health. Very important.
No, but you have niet a stolling.
A blood thickener.
Yeah.
You have to. Blood clotting, you have to. You have to look after your health. Okay? If you need to take medicines, you need to look after your health, you have to look after your health. What did you say? September?
7 september, dat is 25 Elul. De week voor Shoshone. Het is pas vrijdag als Shoshone.
Should be good.
Yeah?
The week of Slichas.
Ja, dat is niet gezegd.
7th September.
Julie sent me an email. Go from today from Israel to
Baku.
Activities.
Baku.
Yeah.
You have to lead in
What do they do?
Missed the flight and the flight van afternoon is full.
Maar je hebt het ervoor gegeven. Nee, je hebt niet op Shabbos gedaan.
No, okay. I'm here.
Yeah. Shkoyach, everyone. Thank you.
Is that in Hebrew, that book, or is it also in English?
It's English.
Because I want to see if it's nice to have that. Just to see.
But it is
Fun.
something, if everything is for immediate.
Stadsman die stuurt mij, hij zit een beetje in de file, doet 10 minuten later. Nou.
Thank you.
Can't sieve, you're still can't sieve. Doesn't help. Only Boira makes a difference, not by sieving.
Ik ga toch naar Amerika toe. Paul kan nog meenemen.
There's 4 volumes of this already.
Het is volume 2.
There's 1, 2, there's 4 already out.
So you're far ahead of us.
Yeah, I found this. Very good books. Very good books. All right.
Oké, schoon
Want me to, can I put this somewhere?
Je bent hartstikke.
Thank you.
Dank je, vader.
5 minuten is voor mij veel. Ja. 5 uur slaap is heel veel.
Wunderbar.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Sorry.
All the best.
All the
You too.
best.
This one.
Thank you.
Gaat
Goed, dus
inderdaad
moet Rav Katzman, hij zit in de file, die 10 minuten lang.
Is het veel tegen?
Ja, maar als je uit Den Haag komt,
Deze tijd is het toch een beetje...
Het is altijd een onmogelijk gebeurd, of weet ik veel.
Het zit in de kop donker, waar ik niks weet.
Het
Voelen bij.
Nee. Het was geen
Maar
mix.
ik heb toch een klein beetje waarschijnlijk.
En misschien wacht even voor Rav Katzman. Deze is bewaard voor Rav Katzman.
Ik nog een eentje onder de inlassen.
Wil iemand toevallig, moet ik een kan water halen? Wil iemand water? Of zeg je, nee, dat hoeft niet. Ik moet even mijn dochter, die zit met het probleem. Toet. Wat?
Ja, 4 is inderdaad een beetje verstopt deze kant. Hè?
Ja, hij schrijft 10 minuten, ja.
Nee.
Maar het duurt 3 uur.
Prima. Wil jullie?
Ja, laat me los.
Ben, wil jij nog?
Wat is dicht, jullie kunnen eten.
Ja.
Ja, nou, jij hebt een beetje...
Dichtbij zijn de telefoonwinkel. Ik heb dus een
Nee, het gaat wel.
blokje.
Ga je rustig naar de
Op Scheldeplein?
winkelcentrum hier.
Ja, maar waar moet
Zijn er 3?
Ja, dan moet je even rondlopen, dan zie je het wel.
die daar in de hoek? Ja,
Ik
ja.
weet
Ja,
niet
in de
hoe
hoek.
het zit, maar ze zijn er.
Ja, maar die jongens komen helemaal uit Zandvoort.
Nou, maar als het ook.
Ze komen uit Noord of het België, Eiburg. Komen ze helemaal.
Ze zijn in de winkel, maar ze vandaan komen in de
Niet een visum, ja.
Die kan zo is.
Stoten, maar het kwam niet.
Buurman van mij, die hebben ze Bibo, hoe heet het? Obibo.
Odido heet dat.
Odido.
Ja.
Dio, ja.
Maar,
Je kan ook Ben nemen.
wat?
Ben is er ook.
Ben is er ook.
Daar zit tegenover ons. Je moet bij hem zijn. Je moet bij hem zijn.
Oké, goed. Een probleempje, maar goed. Nee,
Wat voor probleem?
Maar gaat hij dan 10 minuten langer door?
dat zijn zo.
Nee, prima door. Prima.
Nee, maar je zei over Sefatara wat niet kosher is. Over 14 dagen krijg je een shiur daarover van jullie rabbijn.
Oh, prima. Oh, dat is hopelijk op dit moment. Nou, klopt. Hij heeft dan een doosje opgegeven.
Nou ja, goed, daar kan ik ook niks aan doen. Hij vroeg me of hij daarover zou spreken. Ik zeg, is goed.
Er is een nummer 2 waarin staat hoe je bij een Sefer Torah moet reageren. Heb ik net toen voorgelezen, weet je nog? We hadden niks. Ik pak een boekje uit en ik ga maar kijken wat er staat. En dat is in het Torah. Wat moet je